wind howled outside, rattling the windows of our mountain cabin as the snow piled higher and higher. We'd been trapped in the blizzard for 2 days now, completely cut off from the outside world. No power, no cell service. Just me, my wife Rachel, and our 8-year-old son Max. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the temperature inside was dropping fast. We were huddled around the fireplace, trying to keep warm, when we heard it. Knock, knock, knock. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the knocking came again, louder and more frantic. I exchanged a look with Rachel, her eyes wide with concern. Who would be out in a storm like this? I grabbed the flashlight and cautiously made my way to the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. Who's there? I called out, but there was no answer, just more desperate knocking. I unlatched the door and pulled it open, squinting against the freezing wind and snow swirling in. A man stood there, shivering violently, his face pale and lips blue. He looked disheveled, with snow caked on his hair and beard, his clothes soaked through. Please, he gasped, I'm lost. My car broke down. I've been walking for hours. I need to warm up. Something in my gut told me to hesitate, but what was I supposed to do? I couldn't leave him out there to freeze to death. Come in, I said, stepping aside. He stumbled inside, collapsing onto the floor in front of the fire. Rachel handed him a blanket, her expression wary. What's your name? She asked. John, he muttered between chattering teeth. I was driving up the mountain, took a wrong turn, and my car got stuck. Thought I was going to freeze out there. Rachel and I exchanged glances again, but we didn't say anything. Max was sitting quietly, staring at the man. I couldn't help but notice how he avoided eye contact, his gaze flicking around the cabin as if he was scanning the place. As the hours passed, something about John's story didn't sit right with me. The roads had been impassable for over a day now. How had he even managed to drive up here? And why didn't he have any supplies in his car? It wasn't long before Rachel whispered her doubts to me. Do you think he's telling the truth? I didn't answer. I didn't know what to think. But as night fell, the atmosphere grew more tense. John seemed to be warming up, but instead of relaxing, he grew restless. He kept pacing around, looking out the windows, and asking strange questions about how long we'd been here, how isolated the cabin was, whether anyone else knew where we were. I started to feel uneasy. Something about his presence felt off. I could see it in Rachel's eyes too, the creeping fear. What if we had let the wrong person in? As the firelight flickered, I realized something. John hadn't mentioned any footprints when he knocked. There were no tracks leading up to the cabin. The snow outside had been untouched, freshly fallen. We hadn't expected the storm to hit so fast. What started as a crisp, clear winter hike had quickly turned into a blinding whiteout. The wind howled through the trees, and the snow came down in sheets, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. My friends, Jason, Emily, and Claire, were huddled close, their faces tight with fear and cold. We need to find shelter, Jason shouted over the wind, his voice barely audible. We can't stay out here much longer. That's when we saw it, looming in the distance, an old lodge, barely visible through the swirling snow. The building was weathered and run down, its windows dark and lifeless, but it was our only option. We stumbled toward it, struggling through knee-deep snow until we reached the front door. Jason pushed it open, the hinges creaking ominously. The inside was dark and musty, but at least it was shelter from the storm. Thank God, Emily muttered, shaking the snow from her coat. Claire shivered beside her, staring around the room. Do you think anyone lives here? Doesn't look like it, I said, glancing at the dust-covered furniture. This place must have been abandoned for years. We spread out to explore, the floorboards creaking under our feet. The place was bigger than it looked from the outside. Several rooms, a kitchen, even a grand fireplace. We found some old wood, and Jason managed to get a fire going, the warmth slowly returning to our frozen limbs. As we settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the walls were closing in on us. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the storm and the eerie setting. But then Emily spoke up. Did anyone else see those markings outside? She asked, her voice tight with concern. What markings? Jason asked. In the snow, right before we came in. It looked like symbols, like someone had drawn them in the snow, but they were already half covered by the storm. Claire shuddered. Maybe it's just from animals or something. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't say anything. I figured it was just our imaginations getting the best of us. That night, we slept huddled near the fire, the wind still raging outside. Sometime after midnight, a loud thud woke me. I shot up, heart pounding. "What was that?" I whispered, trying not to wake the others. I got up and grabbed my flashlight, carefully making my way down the dark hallway. The sound seemed to be coming from upstairs. I hesitated before climbing the creaky wooden staircase. Every step felt heavier than the last. At the top of the stairs was a door. It looked like it led to the attic. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob and slowly opened it. The attic was cold and dimly lit by the faint moonlight filtering through a small window. In the corner, half buried under a pile of old blankets, I spotted something. Photographs. I picked one up. It was old, black and white, and showed a group of people standing in front of the lodge. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes looked wrong. I flipped through more of the photos, each one more disturbing than the last. Some showed the same group, but in increasingly bizarre and unsettling poses. And then I found one that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of the lodge, just as it looked now, decayed and abandoned, but in the foreground there were fresh footprints in the snow, footprints leading to the door, our door. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam landing on Jason, Emily, and Claire standing in the doorway, looking pale and confused. "We heard something," Claire whispered. "What are you doing up here?" I showed them the photographs, and their expressions darkened. "These people," Emily began, her voice trembling. "They look familiar, like I've seen them before." "That's impossible," Jason said, shaking his head. "These pictures must be decades old." Before anyone could say anything else, the floor beneath us creaked. Then, from somewhere in the house, we heard a faint voice, whispering, echoing through the walls. "We need to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now." But when we reached the front door, it wouldn't budge. It was locked, no jam shut, and the wind outside had gone eerily silent. That's when we heard it again, the voice, closer this time, coming from somewhere within the house. We weren't alone, and now we had no way out. It was supposed to be a quick drive. I had just left the city, heading back to my cabin in the mountains for a much-needed break. The forecast had called for a light snowstorm, nothing I couldn't handle. But by the time I reached the winding mountain roads, the storm had turned into something much worse. The snowflakes came down faster, heavier. My windshield wipers could barely keep up. The further I drove, the worse it got. The road was empty, no other cars in sight, and with each mile, the visibility dropped. I figured I could push through. I just needed to get to the cabin, and I'd be safe. Then it happened. The car sputtered, shuddered, and came to a complete stop. I tried restarting the engine, but nothing, just the quiet hum of the snowstorm outside. The power was still on, and I had heat, but I was stranded. My phone had no service, and with the snow piling up around me, I knew I couldn't walk anywhere in this weather. I sat there for a while, just trying to think through what to do. I knew the storm wasn't supposed to last long, so I figured I'd wait it out. But as the hours went by, the wind howled louder and the snow piled up higher. I started to get anxious. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. As the night drew closer, the cold crept into the car, even with the heater running. My breath fogged up the windows, and the cabin felt smaller, tighter. I tried to keep calm, but a growing unease gnawed at me. I glanced out the window, seeing nothing but thick white snow and the dark shapes of trees just beyond the reach of my headlights. It was then that I saw it. Movement. Just outside my window, my heart skipped. A figure, dark against the whiteness of the snow, moving quickly. I couldn't make out any details, but the figure was tall, looming. I froze, watching, heart pounding in my chest. The figure stopped at the side of the car. I held my breath, praying I wasn't seen. My hand hovered over the door handle, but I stayed frozen in place. Then there was a knock on my window, a sharp, insistent tap. I jumped, my heart racing. My mind screamed for me to drive away, but I was stuck. The snow was too thick. I looked back at the figure. There was no way I could ignore it now. Slowly, I rolled down the window a crack, just enough to hear. "You lost?" the voice came, cold and raspy. I froze again, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I didn't answer. The figure wasn't familiar, and I could barely make out their features in the snowstorm. They stood too still, almost unnaturally so. I thought about driving off, but the snow was thick. The car wasn't moving. The figure didn't move either, just stood there, waiting. "Please," the voice continued, "let me in. I need help." Something about the request felt wrong. My gut told me not to open the door, but my body moved anyway. Slowly, I unlocked the car. The door creaked open, and the stranger stepped inside, shaking snow off their jacket. I could see them now, clearer. Their eyes were too wide, too dark, and there was something off about the way they moved. "I didn't mean to scare you," they said, settling into the passenger seat. "But I've been out here for hours, waiting for someone to pass by." I didn't answer. The storm raged louder, drowning out any sound but the howl of the wind. The figure sat silently next to me, not even bothering to look out the window. Minutes passed in eerie silence. But then I noticed it. There was something unsettling about their presence. The air felt colder, and I couldn't stop glancing over at them, trying to figure out what was wrong. I reached for the door handle to leave, but the stranger spoke first, their voice sending chills down my spine. "Leaving already?" they asked. "The storm's not over. You won't make it. You might as well stay here with me." My blood ran cold. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. Something was wrong. The car felt smaller, the air thicker, like I was suffocating. My hands shook, and I realized just how cold the interior of the car had become, despite the heater still running. I turned to the stranger, ready to shout, but my voice froze in my throat. Their eyes, those dark, too wide eyes, were locked on me. There was no warmth in them, no humanity. Suddenly, I heard a sound outside the car, a crunch of snow under heavy boots. Then, another figure appeared by my window, pressing their face up against the glass. My stomach dropped, and my heart pounded in my chest. "Two is better than one," the stranger next to me whispered. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And as I reached for the door again, the first figure's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with terrifying strength. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the storm.